if it's possible. Hey, Abhimanyu. Hi, Yashwant.
Hi.
A bunch more folks.
Good afternoon,
Hi.
everybody.
Hey, sure.
Okay. Hi, Sanjay.
Guys.
Good to see you. Awesome.
Hey, Sridhar.
Awesome. We have like 23 people. Awesome. Let's go.
Excellent.
So,
Yes.
okay. Yeah. So, Akilan, thanks for doing the session with us. And I know you've been in the midst of some super intense days and weeks and months, the past few months since you joined Infeedo. Why don't you talk a little bit about your experience? How did you get to this role that you're doing at Infeedo, and how has that journey been?
Thanks for inviting me. And for people who have already seen this on LinkedIn, this is my first ever AMA. So let me know if I'm going too fast and not answering to the point. Please have the chat on fire. I'll be able to pick some cues from there. So to get started, I was someone who never wanted to be in sales. All my life, I thought that I'm the background guy who wants to be backstage and never get into the spotlight. But when I started interviewing post my college, I realized maybe 40, when I'm 40, if I decide to take sales, that's going to be difficult. Why don't I try something that I don't want first? And if it doesn't work, I still have the chance to move into a different role. That's when I met a few people at Frost. It was in a way a campus interview where 6 of us got placed at Frost. Started off as an account executive working the Western European market, selling consulting services to healthcare giants with little to no knowledge about healthcare. So the first few weeks were just to understand what the healthcare landscape is. And for people who understand the landscape, you know that it's not something that you can just categorize into 5, 10 different categories and then you'll start working on it. Every category has its own multiple subcategories. Initially, if I have to look back, I joined Frost and Sullivan as someone who didn't know oncology and cancer meant the same. So that was my healthcare knowledge. To where I went, I think it was steep learning in terms of the healthcare industry. In terms of sales, again, what really kept me going was while I thought I was an introvert, I realized I was more an ambivert who has characteristics from both sides of the spectrum. But when I started speaking to people, that kind of kept me going. I realized that I'm someone who likes to talk a lot and meet a lot more new people. And then 4 years later or 3.5 years later, I faced this stage at Frost where multiple deals fell through the pipe, which were all verbal commits, which would have just taken me 1,000% over my target. I'm not kidding. My target was around $120,000. From there, my active pipeline was 1.2 million, and I lost the entire 1.2 million in a span of 1 week. That's when I realized, okay, heartaches are not something that makes me super comfortable, and I realized maybe I should look at something different. And one of my friends suggested I look at the SDR role. 2018, SDR was probably something that half the sales population hadn't heard of. So I ventured into Freshworks as a senior SDR, tried multiple products, different regions. I initially started out with the UK market, then from there went on to the US market. Realized that every part of US, UK is different. Every industry is different. So there is a lot of learning from there. But what I realized during this entire stint was SDRs at heart are people who really like having those conversations, especially in the US market. That's not something that comes by easily, right? On an average in US, SDR dials nothing less than 80 to 100 calls, and the pickup is 1 or 2. So I wanted to try something new. I wanted to try something new for the SDR role. And that's when I started mentoring people who joined the SDR function in Freshworks. Along with that came a lot more learning and responsibilities. Took a small step in moving into a people manager role at Kissflow. Then I decided maybe I need to go somewhere else where it's even more challenging. And that's when I met Infeedo. When I interviewed, when I got my offer, when I speak to people, they are like, no, don't. One, you're going to be a first-time people manager and you're going to inherit a team, which is not something that even experienced people would like to do. And people want me from not doing it. Infeedo, in a way, was more welcoming than challenging. So from week one, I've been telling this to people whom I'm interviewing these days as well. I'm yet to complete my onboarding. There are still one or two modules that I'm not trained about because there's just something new coming in day out. There's a lot of firefighting that's happening. I think that happens with every startup that you go, right. There are processes that are already there. There are people that have a different mentality already there. And for someone who's never worked the market that Infeedo focuses on, to go there and understand their roles and everything, I think that's the most exciting phase for me. So, in short, this is my 7 years from an account executive at Frost to Infeedo.
Awesome. So when are you planning to complete your onboarding?
I don't know. Hopefully, people on this call will help me a bit as well. If there is 1 week where I can just take a step back and look at other things, then yes, that's when I'm planning to do my onboarding. Then.
Wonderful. Okay, so it's exciting to see the transition from being an account executive to becoming an SDR manager, right? And I want to ask you, every SDR manager, everybody who is managing people or a team of people and is able to get them to work well together will typically have a superpower. They either know it or don't know. What's yours?
Uh, I don't think it's a superpower. I think this is something that all of us sometimes forget, sometimes realize. To me, I think what really worked for me is still being an SDR at heart, understanding that managing people or mentoring people, unless you know the role, unless you understand the role better, there is no way that people are going to look up to you. So probably that's one of I wouldn't call it superpower. That's one of the things that I understood a little early, because coming to a team that has been working in a particular way and then suddenly going and bringing about changes, unless the team believes that you know what you're doing, I don't think it's going to be a successful path for both parties. So probably that's one thing that I would call a superpower.
So that was a question I had in mind as well. Talk about taking over a team mid-flight, because you kind of joined somewhere in like sometime in Q3 or like early Q2. I mean, late Q2, early Q3 or something, calendar quarter, right? Taking over a team when they are like in their outbound motion, whatever sales development stuff is going on. Talk about what that experience was like, and what happened. How would you have done it differently if you took it over now with all that hindsight and wisdom?
Quite a few things that I might have changed in the way I approach things, but what really helped was even before I joined, I met the team. So I had at least 10 days to prepare what I need to do. I had the understanding of their current processes and what they are currently facing. And kudos to a couple of them. I'll start with Bhavan, because day one, I had a document of his understanding of all people in my team. So I didn't start off fresh. I literally had a wealth of knowledge that was transferred to me. So probably that's one thing that is important whenever you're inheriting a team, right? Understanding where they came from and what all they've gone through to the point when you join. So that really helped. And a couple of other things that I would have done probably different is when I took over, I think there was a lot of firefighting in terms of what we wanted to do with a set of tool stack, tech stack for that matter. Maybe that should have taken a little less priority than I gave it, because I realized that's an ongoing thing, right? Tech stack, any SDR team that you meet, they still want the best out of everything. Even if you give them the best, they'll still find one or two things that could be improved. So I felt I left a lot of time on fixing the tech stack issues. And since I have the team here, I think I'll be honest with them as well here. I think one thing that I failed, or one thing I want to do more, is rather than just looking at tools, processes, I probably want to spend more time with individual SDRs and see how we can help them get better, be it at the SDR role or the future roles that they want to be.
Interesting. So you're saying you would probably put more focus on the people than the process and tools and stuff. That's good. Okay. Um, so companies, as they scale, when they set up their inside sales motion, they have different configurations. They might say, somebody is an inbound SDR, somebody is an outbound SDR, terminology, title, leaving all of that terminology, title, and all of those things aside. How have you thought of, given the nature of the business, and including your previous experience at Freshworks and stuff, right? Given the nature of the business, how have you thought of, does somebody do inbound only, or does somebody do outbound only, or do they take a territory and both inbound and outbound is part of that, or how have you put together that framework?
So currently we are going with the specialized approach where there's an inbound function and outbound functions separately. But if I have to look at what I've learned from outside, what I'm seeing outside, I think hybrid is the way forward. But the challenges would differ from company to company, right? Currently at Infeedo, we have a different approach in terms of how we are approaching the market. So if I put up a hybrid team right away, I think we are going to struggle in terms of one function or the other. So either inbound is going to work really well for us or outbound is going to work really well for us. Because again, it comes down to the talent that's currently available in the team as well. So if you are a team of 20, 25 people, then I think it's easier for you to understand how do you mix it up so that there is a balance. But when you're scaling up a team, I think first things first is to ensure that there is a constant, or the team is on autopilot in terms of the filling up the entire top of the funnel. And once that is done, that's when you start to experiment a little further. So I had the same conversation with our SVP Finance this morning, where we are looking at, hey, if we are to start an outbound function, why can't we start it right away? But we need to look at the reality, right? Right now, we want to ensure that the inbound or the inside sales team is up and running without any glitch, at least bare minimum of an 80-90% autopilot. And that's when you can start experimenting on new things. So that's something that we are looking at. However, given the industry's data that we look at, right? Any company that's between 1 to 10 million, 70% of their revenue comes from inbound. I'm talking traditionally, this could be different for each company, but 70% is inbound and 30% is outbound. But when you scale from 10 million to 100 million, it just turns around. It's 70% outbound and 30% inbound. So this is the data I was just looking at online a couple of months back. So for us, we want to ensure that we are riding this wave a little earlier. We don't want to reach a particular point and then decide, hey, you know what, we should start the outbound engine. There are just too many good talent within the team who are really good at outbound, and yet they are utilized on the inbound leads for now. So kind of nurturing their inputs, taking their thoughts on setting up the outbound process is something that I'm looking at in Infeedo. If I have to answer your question straight, there is no one way about it. Each company, each product, each market segment that we work will react differently to an inbound versus an outbound function.
Interesting. So you mentioned that there are the 70-30 split was quite interesting. Is that from the Bridge group or something of that sort?
Yes, it was from the Bridge group.
Okay. Okay. So you also hired lots of SDRs recently, didn't you? You added more people to the
I
team.
interviewed a lot of SDRs, if I have to be honest. We've hired some of the best out there.
Awesome.
But that's something that I've been talking to you as well, right, Sridhar? Right now, I think India is in a phase where this is a great boom for us. I mean, 5 years back, if you spoke about 38, in fact, it's 39 unicorns this year. So nobody would have even thought about it seriously. But I think that's something that we need to look at going forward. Any company that's becoming a unicorn, be it in India or outside, I think the need for SDRs is going to be alive for the next decade, to be honest, right? So finding the right talent has been a challenge for us in India market. You either get people who are really good at communication, or who are really good at culture, or who are really good at the overall picture that they are able to picture and position in an interview. However, an SDR needs to do all three. Right? So this is something I tell my team as well as during the interviews. Any SDR, while people consider it to be an entry-level role, I think SDR is as important as the CEO, because that's the first phase any prospect is going to hear from. So if we don't hire the right people in an SDR function, I think it's going to be super difficult for us to convey the company's mission, and the culture on probably the first two calls itself, right? So India is currently facing a huge talent shortage there. I understand there are a lot of people who want to be in sales, who are passionate about the SDR role. but there is still a knowledge gap that we need to kind of fix as a community. So that's something that we've been talking. That's something that I want to do as well. Somehow or the other, giving it back to the community on how do they get better at being an SDR.
Yeah, what better than starting off by sharing your stuff, right?
Yep.
By the way, it looks like you've really gone through Kalpesh's video.
I have to, right? You learn from different people. There are few points that kind of makes you think completely opposite to what you had in your mind. So listening to more podcasts, listening to more people is what helps you learn more.
Awesome.
It might not be relevant to your role or relevant to your company, but then it's always nice to know what people are doing elsewhere.
Do we have just a small detour? Do we have your father on this call?
I think we do.
He'll be quite pleased.
Thank you. Are you there? I hope you just say hi for everyone. Yeah, probably he's not here. Anyways.
He's probably on mute. Anyway, Uncle, thanks for joining us. It's awesome. Yes, so we all realize that talent crunch is like here and now, right? How do you source or identify or groom talent?
No single answer against you though, because what we realized during the entire interview process is that people who actually have SDR experience, people who have actually been in SaaS world, are sometimes not up to the mark of someone who's not. So if you look at the current SDR team at Infeedo, we have someone who comes from a marketing background. We have someone who was a co-founder themselves. One person, a mechanical engineer who was just doing freelance work for within the marketing space. So what I started realizing is people are really good at sales, irrespective of which function they currently work in. So a couple of things that we are doing is one, referrals. So be it from the internal team members who they've worked with in the past, if they have relatives who know who's a good salesperson. But what has helped me is the external referral that I'm able to get from the SDR manager community or the sales community itself. So what happens is, let's say, for example, we'll take your example, right, Sridhar. B2 Brain, you're planning to hire a few people, and people I think who are really great at being an SDR who were not able to crack it at Infeedo. I'm going to share their profiles with you, and a lot of other people do the same with me as well. So randomly, I get people, hey, Akilan, do you mind looking at this profile for the SDR role? So I think that's something that we need to keep building going forward, where as a community we end up sharing more and seeing if we can help each other out. But that's the only thing that has worked really well, getting referrals from the community itself. And the second thing is, like I said, going beyond just this traditional sales people, looking at people outside of sales. I interviewed someone who's a fashion designer by profession. She would like to give it a shot at the sales role because her husband is currently a sales guy. And when they both started sharing what the sales role is about, that piqued her interest. She was like, Akilan, I want to give it a shot. So I think there is a pivot happening now. People who were traditionally believing that if I studied one, I want to be with that particular role only. I think that's changing these days. So looking at non-sales profile might actually give you really good candidates that you never even thought of.
Awesome. So Harsh, who is an SDR at Yellow, and he and I were the ones who started this whole Unfair Advantage Slack community. He's an engineer turned SDR, right? And he and I were talking about having ways to, promote sharing of profiles of people coming into the workforce, because I can see we have over 25 people on this call, and I'm sure several of you will want to hire people in your teams. And we'll enable this more and more on the Slack as well in the coming days. Okay, I know Vamshi and I previously had a chat. He mentioned for Outplay, they were hiring a few people, and then they had, after they hit their hiring targets, there was still a pool of candidates that he wanted to share and see if others wanted to take a look at it, and so on and so forth. So I think it's all great for the community, right? The important part is we're all coming in with a very open mind saying, okay, let's find talent, let's groom them, let's give them a way to work and grow. Okay. And so, yeah, I think that's a fantastic way to look at it. There are some thoughts around what I mean, I'm not a sales guy. I've been a product person several years, but now I'm like pretty much into sales, and I have a different perception and awakening about what this can possibly become. So we'll talk about it subsequently. There was a question by Jay earlier around processes you would update at Infeedo. I think you already answered it. Jay, is that correct?
Yep, I was looking at, which are the processes when you just started with your Infeedo role as a SDR manager. So after your onboarding, after your training, which are the processes that you looked at first of changing?
So Jay, again, if I have to give you the actual answer, there is still a lot more that needs to be changed, right? When you join a company, like I said, building the trust, and people need to look up to you to understand that you're doing it for their own good, right? If I just go back and tell the team that you need to make 80 calls, I don't care how you do it, right? That's not going to help. So in terms of the processes that we looked at, we were one trying to figure out how do we cut down on an SDR's operational time, right? How long does an SDR typically end up spending on the operation stuff, right? Be it on Salesforce, be it researching for prospects. So that's where I looked at B2Brain as one option where we are trying to get some insights without even doing the research ourselves. While that helps, I also wanted to give kudos to some of the team members who go beyond it, right? End of the day, we end up selling to people, we end up selling to human beings. The more personalized we are in understanding who they are, I think that's where the entire sales is going to click. So one is definitely on the operational front. How can I reduce the operational work that an SDR goes through? And two, that one thing that I'm planning to do for the future, probably this is news for some of the team members as well. Again, this is a wild thought. I don't want to look at an SDR's productivity or efficiency in terms of the opportunities that they create. Rather, I want to look at the overall conversion, be it for an inbound team, starting from first response time, from a marketing lead to moving towards a sales qualified lead. How long does it take for all these? So this is something I know I don't know if it's going to work really well for every company, but this is something that I want to experiment probably 1 year down the line. So for me to get to that point where I look at beyond SAOs, I need to ensure that there is a process in place to look at FRTs more objectively, right? If I just say first response time for a mid-market account versus an enterprise account has to be the same, I don't think it works that way, because when you talk to an enterprise account, you need to understand the account a little further. An SMB account, the first response time could be less than 30 seconds, where I just call them, hey, I understand that you're blah, 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 and then I can get going. But when I talk to, let's say, a director at an enterprise level, I need to understand what kind of a role that person plays. Before I do that, if I'm going to get on a call and then just for the sake of first response time, I get on a call, I think that's going to spoil the entire conversation. So that's something that I'm setting up going forward, where be it first response time, MQL to the SQL conversion time, and how or why an SQL becomes an sales accepted opportunity. So doing all this requires some more time. So one advice for anybody who's inheriting a team would be, don't start changing process right away. Give the team some more time to go on that flow and make those changes slowly. Half the time, people shouldn't even realize that the change took place. That's when the team functions without any problem. So that would be my answer, Jake. If I have to give you a more detailed answer, I think it's going to be a different ballgame altogether. But in a nutshell, this is what I would want to change at Infeedo.
Awesome. When you are hiring new people, there must be some things you look for in them. Some traits, characters. What are those?
Okay. One, I think this one of the most uncommon ones is, are they being true to themselves? Because half the time when I interview people, they just want to leave the current company and they don't care what role they are entering, right? And they try to convince you that SDR is their life and they are super excited about the SDR role. So that's one thing that I always look at, where the candidate is being true to what they are. So that's one. And two, obviously, when you're in a startup, I think energy has to be there. Energy could also mean a little more nervousness, which is still fine. But people who just want to be casual and take it easy on an interview, I personally feel that they might struggle in a startup culture because uh, I'm talking, even if my team wasn't here, I'm going to say the same thing. The current team will eat them alive. If you don't come with energy, the kind of effort that the team is currently putting in, I wouldn't be surprised if somebody feels that they are being one of the underperformers in the team already. So energy is something that I really look at. And the third thing is obviously communication, but communication in a way where it doesn't have to be a Shakespeare English or a fluent accent or anything. It's if you have something in your head, if you're able to convince me or communicate that to me, I think that's all I look at. So to do this, we are trying out different things. I always, even on a normal interview, I put them through a scenario and then ask them to think about the scenario and come up with this. It's not a mock call, it's more of a mock approach. So if you were in this situation, what are the different things that you'll be doing? So thinking about or looking at how the person thinks and how they are able to communicate their thought process is something that I look at. And at Infeedo, culture is definitely the number one mover for us. So I don't know about other companies, but Infeedo has a culture around in itself. So once I am done, somebody meets the SDR function itself for a mock call, and people who clear that go through another set of SDRs who've been in the company for a longer time to understand if these people are a culture fit for us. Once these 3 rounds are done, every candidate that joins Infeedo will go through the founders round, where it's a 15-20 minutes where they meet one of the co-founders, and there is a rapid fire questioning that happens then, but it's more to understand if people have been themselves throughout the entire interview process. Because when you are under pressure, probably for 5-10 minutes, you'll be able to fake it. But after that, your reality comes in. So this is how the current interview process works at Infeedo.
Nice. On that point, you mentioned something about the person being able to sustain their energy within the team and so on. So there was a question from Kalpesh. If let's say somewhere in between a certain quarter or something, somebody loses steam, it can happen to the best of us, right? How do you bring them back into a reasonably good shape?
If you look at Infeedo's context, this is something that surprised me, because as SDRs, we are always competitive. We want to do better than the other person in the team. But this current team that I have, if let's say one person is not doing too well in a month, somehow the entire team rallies around them to a point where an off day ends up with you having an ice cream in your house because somebody just books an ice cream. I had one day when I was just mentally off. These people sitting in Delhi figured out my address in Pallikarnai, which is not an easy location for people to locate. And they sent across an ice cream to just make my day better. So that's something that I see in the team often, where if one person is doing something really well, the other person wants to learn from there. If one person is not doing too well, the other person wants to go and help. So it's the onus is not on me in the current function, where I'll have to go say, hey, you're not doing a great, you're not having a great time. Here's what you need to work on. I think by the time I reach them, they already know what they need to change.
Wonderful.
So group learning and ensuring that the team still stays together, even if they are competitive, is something that will solve for this issue.
Oh, that's fantastic. They would have literally had to ship it by boat to Pallikarnai, I would think.
Yep.
Awesome. So for those who are not familiar with Chennai, Pallikarnai is a place which several years ago or several decades ago was a swamp. And now there are lots of construction. So, when it rains, it pours and it kind of settles there. That's right. So, in all of these various points, you seem to really enjoy working with your team, and your team seems to enjoy working with you. I saw the LinkedIn update, and lots of support for you. And how do you tap into their superpowers?
Like I told you, right? I think it starts with you believing that you are still an SDR, trying to understand the team from their shoes. I think this is something that most of us overlook when we move from an individual contributor role to a people manager role. We just assume that we know everything and we can fix everybody's problem. It's not the case. Just like how people say a child is born along with a father and a mother, right? Until then, they are just a couple. Only when a child is born, they also get promoted to a father and a mother. I think that's how it works. And when you start from an IC role to a people manager role, you end up learning things that you never thought existed. So that is one. And a couple of other things that I would probably point out here is one, when you're inheriting a team, when I joined Infeedo, the first thing I did was to understand where each one of them come from. And for someone who's been in Chennai all my life or in Tamil Nadu all my life, to understand how these people think is itself a challenge for me to go through, right? So for me, I started there. I started to understand what are the things that they think is normal and they think is abnormal, and what do they need from a captain. So in Infeedo, we don't have managers system. So every team will have a captain. So nobody calls me a manager. I'm an SDR captain here. So as a captain, how do I get the best out of them? Another thing that I consciously try doing, that's something probably I want to change now, is when I was an SDR, I was looking for a particular traits from my manager, right? So I want to be that person whom I imagined a manager to be. So what helped here is I've had multiple manager changes during my tenure, and within Freshworks I had 3. So whenever a new manager came in, the first thought process that you have is, oh, what is he going to bring in, right? How is he going to change the way we were all comfortable working with? So that's something that I addressed upfront, where I didn't want to bring about changes. I wanted to ensure that people do their work the way they do, and then slowly started to make their lives a lot more easier. Again, telling this in front of the team, I don't know how it's going to backfire. I think changes are going to start from now on. Now that we know where each of our strengths and weaknesses are, we need to build some processes in place that works both ways. All these days, it was about how well are you at your work and how do I get you better. But now it's, as a team, how do we get better?
This is like your 2022 SKO speech, man.
So again, coincidentally, that's something that we were talking this morning. We want to start off with our sales kickoff. I don't think we ever had that at Infeedo. That's something that we're planning this time around.
Wonderful. All the best for that. So there were a couple of people who had questions around what does your tool stack look like?
Okay. I think we've discussed about this a lot than I discussed with anybody else, but there is no right tool stack for any SDR function. You bring the best of every world. You bring Gong, you bring Outreach, you bring Zoom Info, and still the SDR team would need something better, right? So right now, we are trying to build a tech stack that is not probably gold standard, but we are trying to build something that's going to be the best that we can get right now. Yep. So our current tech stack, we use Salesforce. Obviously, you've seen Jagrat already mentioned that in the chat. We are probably going to get into one of the sales engagement platforms. We are figuring out which one it's going to be. And obviously, the basics, LinkedIn Sales Navigator, be it your database vendors, Zoom Info, DiscoverOrg, and all that, Lucia. So I don't think there is a one-way answer to tell you what the right tools tech stack has to be. Every company, every SDR has a different approach towards what they want to work with. Same Apple versus Android, right? Some of them prefer Apple, then you mean you'll have to get a different tech stack altogether.
Okay, good. So I guess, Ravi, that probably answer your question. There was also one question on, are there courses or books that you get people to learn in order to be better at their SDR function, or like how do SDRs keep enriching their knowledge over time?
Okay. Again, I'm taking one example from the team itself, Jagrat. He ends up reading a lot more than probably I do, right? But what we need to also realize is some of these books, some of these content that we see online is not or might not be relevant to the market that we sell to. For example, the kind of casual approaches that you have in the US market might not entirely work in the UK market. So understanding the market intricacies is more important than just going with the whatever the entire sales leaders say in this LinkedIn world. So what I would recommend is, more than looking at books or podcasts, learning from each one of the SDRs who've been in the company. That helps the most. There are a couple of books that I definitely recommend. Probably Never Share, Never Share the Difference. That's one. And Fanatical Prospecting is another one. But again, it's as an SDR, I think more than learning how to sell, I think the more you learn about people, the more you learn about how people react to things. I think that's what helps you as an SDR, because you hardly get 30, 40 seconds to convince someone that you are trying to help them out. So if somebody wants to read about psychology, I think that's a good place to start. Human psychology is something that an SDR can always read about.
Awesome. In fact, yeah, go on.
Yeah, okay, just a disagreement. So books do help out. Obviously, you can get some knowledge from your colleagues, etc. as well. So I've just completed the Challenger Seal. So I am a hybrid SDR and MDR for India.
Okay.
So we have a slightly more premium solution for the Indian market, where I always used to run introduce which no one else used to run it. No one runs that in US or Europe. So it was around pricing. So
Jay, my context here is, if you want to get better at things, there are multiple things that you can read. But the problem, I'll tell you where, because of the overload of content, I have a feeling that SDRs are getting too confused with whatever work they are currently doing. So probably one thing that I would recommend is, rather than reading a book and following it exactly the same way, try out something, work with a team saying that this is what I learned, and then see if you guys can have kind of like a SWOT where this is going to work, this is not going to work. Try it out and experiment, right? What happens when you read and when you just follow a sales leader is you blindly think that that's going to work. End of the day, we are dealing with human beings. Everybody is different. So take examples of Josh Brown. Some of his examples might work with you and me, but might not work with another person. However, given the current scenario, I think this is something that I wanted to talk about as well. When I joined the SDR role, I knew for a fact that 2 years is when you can look at moving into a different role, right? But these days, it's not that way. People, 6 months, they move into a different function altogether. So as an SDR, if you want to get better at your role, I think understanding people is even more important than the sales techniques in itself. While I agree to your point that it gets you to a better level in terms of your selling process or your selling thought process, it also sometimes hinders your entire brain, because you want to be the best of what Josh Brown teaches you about. What happens when you try that in an India market?
correct. Agreed. So obviously we need to experiment it a lot more. So after every 3 months, run an experiment, see if it works out, did not work out. It works out well, continue doing it, share it across the team. It did not work out, definitely share it with the team. Okay, this is not something which is not going to work out.
100%.
Perfect.
And I add one more point on top of this is, if you are an SDR and something works for you, someone who wants to implement that has to tweak it for their own comfort. What happens is, this is something that we were talking even last week. As SDRs, we tend to ask, how are you doing? Right? When you get on a call, hey, this is so-and-so calling from Infeedo, how are you doing? But 90% of us don't really care whether the prospect is doing well or not. Because whatever calls I've listened to, when somebody asks, how are you doing? They say, great. You don't even follow up something. You just go with your next point, right? So some of them are natural. Again, taking the example of Jagrat, right? If somebody just says, I've been having an okay day, that guy goes to a point where he wants to understand when was the last time they had COVID, when was their vaccination done, how's their family, where do they stay, is it raining, all that. And then he goes on to his SDR work. So if you're a natural at caring for people, go ahead and ask that question. If you're not, I mean, people can understand when somebody's faking it. I'm not saying we fake it. We've just added that to a script, which is redundant. Tell me the last time when somebody said, I'm not doing well, and then you ask them, hey, how can your day be better, or what happened? We end up just asking them that question and then move on to a pitch. So why ask that question?
Interesting. So tell me this, you made a very interesting point around being able to understand like human psychology, right? And not necessarily blindly follow preachings, if one could, right? So clearly the markets are shifting. Markets are evolving faster than we think it is, right? How have you seen the role change over the past few, say, 3-4 years?
I think we'll have to split this into years and months as well. Probably changes took place in the last 6 to 9 months more than what it took in the previous 3 years. So I think going back to the same example, right? There were probably 20 unicorns last year or 12, 13 maybe, but we have 39 this year. And next year we are aiming to have 100 unicorns in our country. So the demand for SDR has gone up, which means there is a huge war for talent. And in that space, I've started seeing a lot of people take up the SDR role, assuming that it's a green world where you just go, you make calls and people pick up your phones and then give you business. It's not the case. So if you were an SDR probably 5 years back, that would have worked. There is not too much competition out there. But now things are changing. I think India is still a little behind in terms of the SDR culture or the cold call sales culture, because that's something that the team taught me when I did a mock call with them and I told them, hey, is this a cold call? After the call, they were like, Akilan, nobody asked that question in India. But if you call in the US, that's a common question that you get from prospects. Is this a cold call? Are you trying to sell me something? But I think in India, I think we are a little, I wouldn't say behind. Probably it's just nature to us that we want to have a conversation with some of the good people that call, apart from the credit card callers and stuff. So things are changing really fast. I mean, the last 9 months has been crazy. So this is a question I had to Bhavan as well. When we are doing the interviews, I asked him, hey, was this the same scenario 9 months back? Did we face a talent crunch as such? And talent crunch is not just in terms of the talent that we get, but also the demands that we get, right? What I earned as an SDR probably 3 years back is the starting pay right now. People can assume that it's because of inflation, because of the overall market and stuff. But I think it's more about the actual talent that is coming from different companies. So the demand is extremely high. And there is just a cream that's available out there. The rest are already in a comfortable role elsewhere. One thing that somebody told me over the weekend that actually made me think a little bit is SDRs usually are fresh out of college. But the last 2 years with the pandemic and people going online education, I think the kind of people whom we are getting from colleges are also not up to the same mark that it was 2 years back. People have lost that connect with multiple conversations and multiple human interactions. I think that's something that has changed as well. So if I have to nail it down to just two things that has changed in the last 3 years, one is the demand, definitely. The demand is just humongous. I mean, if India can tap into it, this can be our own internet boom. Whatever India as a country made as a revenue when we took IT, I think SDR is going to be that if we do the right things starting now. And the second thing that has changed is the entire mentality of people whom we are getting on the SDR role as well. Back then, people who want to work really hard and then make more money, stay in a role for 2-3 years, those are the kind of people who are entering the SDR role. But right now, SDR role has become like an entry into an organization. So someone who joins as an SDR, 6 months later, you see him in RevOps, this product marketing, in HR, in AE role. AE role is a traditional role that people move into from an SDR role, but I think the horizon has just become a lot larger for people who enter as an SDR because you're exposed to a lot more things. So awesome. The entire mentality of who an SDR is has also changed in the last few years.
Interesting. This is something that I tell people when I end up meeting with them, right? The SDR of today is like the Java programmer of the 2000s.
Yep.
Literally, the amount of latitude growth that you call lateral growth that you can see after a few, quarters or years in the role is just outstanding.
Yeah. So one example that I wanted to highlight as well, Sridhar, we have, like I said, people coming from different backgrounds. Rishi, for example, he comes from, he was a co-founder himself. He joined Infeedo, he was handling our HR function for 2 months. And then he moved to an SDR role. Typically, if you look at it, an SDR takes between 2 to 3 months to get completely run. And Rishi was able to smash his 104% of his target in Q1. The first quarter that he ever got on board. So people who are not traditionally salespeople, who think they are really good at sales are not the ones that are really good at sales. Ones who understands business, ones who understand the real business impact a product or a solution can make, those are people that you wanted as SDRs. Probably, I'm just guessing here, probably Rishi might not be a great account executive. Probably that's not something that will fit his kind of an attitude, right? But he really cares. Whoever he's talking to, he really cares about making some impact in their life. So that is also another change that we need to look at. If you traditionally go and hire people who are exposed to sales, who are exposed to the SaaS world, they might fail as SDRs.
Okay, so we are coming towards the end of the session. We're just about 7-8 minutes to go. I know some more questions kept coming in, but there was one point you mentioned, and I want to kind of take you up on that. You talked about understanding of the market for an SDR. You talked about understanding of the market. You talked about understanding of the human psychology, the ability to have multiple conversations, all of that stuff, right? So how have you inculcated or helped the team understand the market and its nuances better? How do you do that?
I think what helped, at least at Infeedo, is we had people like Sankal, Kushbu, who were all SDRs who moved into different roles, but they still keep in touch with all the SDRs that we hire, kind of transferring the knowledge that they learn. But again, if you look at it, things are changing really quickly, right? Probably 5 years back, if you said HR tech is something that a company might invest on, people would have laughed at us. HR would be the last team that an IT team is going to invest technology with. But the pandemic had just shifted things crazily. So if you go with, again, I know the HR tech, I know India market. I don't think it's the same India market we all know a couple of years back. So the only way we can kind of build a trend is to share knowledge within the team, whatever be it. If you speak to an executive or a C-level guy, what was the conversation about? What is something that you learned new from that call? I think that's where we get to know what the market is talking about, right? I think pandemic is one common topic that's easy for us to build a conversation with because the entire world suffered from it. However, if not for the pandemic, I'm thinking how differently would we have understood the Southeast Asia market? How differently would we have understood the US market? Obviously, cultural difference is something that we learn, but what matters to them, right? So that's something that you need to also work cross-functional. You need to work with your marketing team to understand what is every competitor of ours talking in the market. What are the words that they're currently bidding on in the Google AdWords space? So understanding market can't be from one team is what the current scenario is. You need to get everybody involved. There is just so much wealth of information that we have. I think the more we share, the more we learn.
Okay. If there are other questions people have, please post in the chat. I have a quick rapid fire 5 questions for you.
Yep.
Okay. You can choose. So FaceTime or no FaceTime?
FaceTime.
Awesome. WhatsApp or no WhatsApp?
WhatsApp.
Okay. Work on weekdays only or work on weekends also?
Work on weekdays, learn on weekends.
Okay, somebody from your team is screaming. Sorry. Okay, I should have said wrong answers only. That would have made it more interesting. Phone or email?
It depends on the market, but India, I think phone.
Okay. BDR or SDR?
The world needs both.
Awesome. Okay, that's a good answer. So I think you have beautifully captured the cultural fabric around which your team operates and the way everyone comes together. It's like this all for one for all kind of a approach, and also not becoming what do I say, handing out candies, right? Like talking about the more fundamental things like human psychology or understanding of the market or your approach towards caring for customers and prospects and so on. It's been a very, very useful conversation, right? And the fact that you're all literally in the tip of the spear, right? There is huge demand in the market. More companies, even companies that are headquartered outside India, are setting up, groups in India and building the sales function. And people like you who are hiring and ramping up talent are going to be the ones from whom others will expect to learn from, as well as pick talent from in future, right? Which is great. I mean, if the SDR can be an entry door for somebody to build a sales career, there's nothing like it. There's sufficient technology, educated talent in the country, right? Sales as a space has become more technology, process, and data driven. There are enough tools and playbooks that companies use. Now you can actually build a career on it.
I won't
Right,
be surprised 5 years down the line if we have courses in colleges for sales.
Yeah,
BSc
I'm
in
sure.
selling. We may never know.
Yeah, Stoa might probably start one very soon
Yeah.
for all that we care, right? So that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing knowledge. Despite, it's like a trial by fire. Sitting in front of the team and talking in public is not the easiest of things to do. So I think for your first AMA, you have done wonderfully well. I would imagine the audience will also agree. Audience, just give them a thumbs up if you do. And if there are no more questions, we will wrap up. Any closing thoughts, Akilan, before we wrap up?
As much as you can, just give it back to the community. There are loads of talent that we can tap on. Right now, we are just losing out on our own focus and not looking at the bigger picture. So that's something that I would recommend every one of us to do. If you get a chance to speak anywhere, go speak. You may never know. You might inspire to more SDRs.
Awesome. Even your Lord Jagrat has given a thumbs up. So great. Thank you, everybody. You've been a wonderful audience as well. We will have the recording up, and I'll share the link. If you are not part of the Slack community and if you think it would be beneficial to you, please ping me. I had shared the invite on the chat. If you couldn't get it, just please ping me. I'll share it again. And yeah, we look forward to seeing all of you continue the conversation on Unfair Advantage. I do really think the name came up because I do think that this is the time for the inside sales profession to actually have an unfair advantage in building their own businesses and helping grow their business successfully. Yeah, thank you so much, Akilan. Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving and a happy weekend to everybody.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Thanks.